We are going to talk about the human body in biology class, and a quick review, or I'm not sure if this is review or not, about the organization of organisms, living things. Okay, and it is, we start with the basic unit of the organism, the cell. Remember, we said the cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living things. So we're going to talk about some human body cells. A bunch of cells that work together. It's called a tissue. We're not going to talk about tissues in this class for the purposes of this class. A bunch of tissues that work together is called an organ. And you know about some body organs. Heart comes to mind. And what we are going to spend time with are some of the major organ systems of the body. Some of the major organ systems. So, and then of course, what I didn't put on here is all of that goes together to make the organism, the whole organism. Before we get started, we have to talk about a big concept in biology, and that is the concept of homeostasis. This is a big word. You see the prefix homeo in there again. And this definition is the ability of the body to maintain a constant internal environment. You need to know that definition word for word. So you might want to pause this or whatever and write that down. A couple examples. Your heartbeat always goes back to normal. Your body temperature is always around 37 degrees Celsius. Your blood pressure is usually around 110/70. They go up and down during the day, maybe, but pretty much they're around in a very narrow range. Okay, you have a constant internal environment in a narrow range. This works on a system called negative feedback, sort of like the thermostat in your house, where you set the thermostat, say, at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Here's 70 degrees. As the temperature goes up over 70 degrees, the furnace shuts off. Temperature goes back down. When it goes below 70 degrees, the furnace turns back on. And you set that with your thermostat. Your body kind of works in the same way, except the thing in charge of it is not a thermostat, but your nervous system. And so it's your nervous system we want to discuss in some detail. Your nervous system is made up of cells called neurons or nerve cells. Oops, sorry about that. Click back. Neurons, having troubles here today. Neurons is the scientific word for nerves. This is what a nerve cell looks like. It looks very different from the normal-looking nerve cell. From a normal-looking cell, from the cell you maybe made a cell model of in biology or whatever. This is what a nerve cell looks like. And we'll come back to why it looks this way in a minute. I'm going to put up here the terms that you need to know. You'll probably be quizzed over these, or they'll be on a test at some point in time. The 5 parts of a nerve cell that you need to know. The dendrites, the cell body, the axon, the myelin sheath, and the axon endings. And at the end of the axon endings is a spot called the synapse. And we're going to talk about all these briefly in a little bit. So you might want to pause this and record that. There are 3 basic types of nerves. What do nerve cells do? Well, remember that the whole point of a nerve cell, nerves send messages. That's why a nerve cell looks the way it does. Its job is to send a message. There are 3 types of nerve cells. Sensory nerves, which take messages from your body to your brain or spinal cord. Interneurons, what we call processing centers within your brain and spinal cord. And last, motor nerves that bring messages from the brain to the body. You see the word motor in here because generally they're in charge of moving something. When you hear the door handle click, your head turns to look at it. Motor nerves, your sensory nerve heard the door handle. Your interneuron decided to say, I think I'm going to look at the door handle. And your motor nerve moved your head and neck, sent messages to your muscle to contract your muscles to turn your head to see the door. Okay, that's a quick example of how those three kinds of nerves work together. So, sorry about that. So how does a nerve actually send a message? It's called a nerve impulse. A nerve impulse is the method by which a nerve actually transmits a message. We want to look at a nerve impulse today. There are three parts, so you know, to a nerve impulse. The first part is called the stimulus. Stimulus. Stimulus is something that starts a nerve impulse. What kinds of things can you think of that would start a nerve impulse? Well, there are things like, here are three examples right here. You feel a nerve impulse when something puts pressure on your skin. For example, your shoes on your feet right now are pushing on your feet and sending a message to your brain. You're like, well, wait a minute, I was not even aware of that pressure a little bit ago. You're right, now you are. That's an example of something called adaptation that your brain does. But now you feel the pressure of the shoes on your feet, or the watch on your wrist, or the ring on your finger, or whatever. It can be light. You're watching this video right now with your eyes, and your eyes are being stimulated by the light. It can be chemical. Maybe somebody in your house is making chocolate chip cookies. Right now, as I'm making this, I can smell a skunk outside the window. Okay, that's chemical senses. I can taste chocolate chip cookie left over on my tongue. That's chemical senses. Okay? The dendrites of a nerve, these things on the end, they are spread out under your skin and they pick up a message. Or they're spread out in the back of your eye to pick up light. Or they're spread out in your nose and tongue to pick up chemicals. So the stimulus triggers a nerve impulse. The second and the hardest part, I think, to understand of a nerve impulse is something called action potential. Action potential. Action potential is the actual nerve message. After a stimulus, sodium ions rush in the nerve from the outside, creating a wave down the length of the axon, kind of like tipping over dominoes. So in other words, around your nerves, sodium ions, by the way, are positive. I'm going to draw these as little pluses outside the axon. After a stimulus, these things go flooding in to the nerve, all the way down the nerve. I'll show you the hyperlink here a second. Maybe. Here we go. Stimulus. Message all the way down the length of the axon. So tipping over dominoes is kind of what happens, the same kind of idea. Let's check this other link out a second. Here is a nerve. This is the axon of a nerve up here, right here. And, sorry about that. If I hit begin continuous conduction, what happens is the positive ions rush into the nerve in order. Because the inside of a nerve is negatively charged, you can see here on my pointer, the inside of a nerve is negatively charged, and so the outside of the nerve is positively charged. When you touch something, let's say with your finger, that starts an action potential. The positive ions go in because they're attracted to the negative ions. Positive are going in because they're attracted to the negative. What really doesn't happen is this. But now notice what happens afterwards, and the refractory period is that you have basically a resetting of the dominoes every time. So you can feel multiple touches on your finger. Now, the cool thing about your nerves is that they have on them something called myelin. And if I click begin saltatory conduction down here, myelin increases the speed at which the message goes. And that was really, really slow, actually. And we'll see in class how fast messages can actually be transmitted. So as I have written here, myelin makes the message go much faster. Literally, these positives go in one at a time, but when they get to the myelin, that skips along, which enables much faster transmission of a message. Step 3 is called synapse transmission. When a message reaches the end of a nerve, it hits a space called the synapse. Now, this is an important idea. Nerve cells do not touch each other. That means at the end of each nerve cell is a space. That space is called the synapse. So in order for this nerve, you're like, well, hold on a second then. How do I get messages from my feet to my brain? Well, it has to cross this space. And it crosses this space with a chemical. A chemical called a neurotransmitter is squirted across the space. And that stimulates the next nerve to send its message. So as the message, I'm trying to think of what color, I'll do this in green, as the action potential comes down this nerve, gets to the space and it squirts a little chemical across here. That chemical is picked up by this nerve and it continues the message. This happens, we'll talk about this in some more detail when we talk about your brain. So that's basically how nerves send messages and an introduction to the nervous system.